Hello and welcome to another episode of Analyst Bar, episode 11. It's been a while since we've been on air, so we're really excited to be back providing you with some content again. Obviously, there's myself and my old wingman, Colin, that everyone will be familiar with. But we've got an extra face joining us now at Analyst Bar, and also is going to be part of the Not Stats team as well, which is Tom Williams. How are you, Tom?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Great to have you on board. For those of you that probably don't know about Tom, big Notts County fan like the rest of us, but creating some really interesting and detailed content on Twitter, especially around the national leagues as well, and some EFL stuff as well. And definitely worth a follow. I think he's got his Twitter handle up there. So, but yeah, we've got quite a lot of stuff lined up for you, Tom. So I hope you're ready for it.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. I'm ready to get involved and get stuck in, but that's good. Always like to keep busy.
Good. How are you, Colin? What have you been up to?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. Yeah, it's been a while, hasn't it, since we've done one of these podcasts, to be honest. So it's really good to get back onto that. Featuring a few other podcasts, I've done a little bit with Luke Walsh, who's obviously got a fantastic podcast out there looking at the National League, and he's been on there a few times. And I know all three of us know him really well, and I'm looking forward to that content going forward into the next season. Notts County Talk as well, did that recently. In fact, myself and Tom were on the most recent episode. As well as some other things as well. So sort of a lot of it has just been kind of self-study, doing an awful lot of reading around analysis and around kind of club ethos and philosophy, which are things that I really enjoy. A few little sort of courses as well, so PFSA stuff, those sort of things. As well as also working on a project that I can't really talk too much about, but it is really exciting and is putting me in contact with an awful lot of analysts, performance analysts, for example, and recruitment analysts in the game, and drawing on a lot of those experiences as well, just to build my understanding of the game, really. So it's been exciting stuff. What about yourself, Rich? What have you been up to?
I would like to say it's been a quiet absence from the podcasts for myself, but I was actually heavily involved in helping Future Global Sports, sports management company specialising in football and representing footballers mainly at the lower leagues and national league level. But we put together quite a conclusive and detailed managers report where basically profiled over 50 different managers and coaches in the National League North and National League South. It was a bit of a beast. Wasn't the easiest thing to do, I must admit, but the final result was great. If anybody's interested, it is, I will say, unfortunately, at the moment, it's not available in the general domain without having to obviously make a small payment for it. But I will put a link on the description below for this video, and anybody who is interested in getting their heads around that might be worth having a quick look. But certainly came up with some interesting data there. Certainly when you look at the clubs that have just come up from National League North and South as well. So Mike Williamson at Gateshead, obviously they absolutely battered everybody last season. His stats were absolutely amazing. But hopefully Luke Williams' stats will be more amazing this season because he'll have the gold that Williamson had. So that's interesting. And also, when you look at some of the other clubs down there as well, Kittrieb at Maidstone did a fantastic job down there. And again, I'm really looking forward to seeing how Dorking do this season as well, because considering what Mark White's done down there, both with the ownership of the club and actually managing the club as well, is quite a story. And his stats are pretty good as well. So it's going to be interesting. So yeah, that's been pretty much me. You've been busy, Tom, as well. Obviously, as we've discussed, you've been getting your head into all sorts, throwing yourself into football data, and
just sort of started this summer. Get all my content out. The season preview I had on, it should be on the pin tweet at the moment. That was biggest piece done. That was quite a long
That was
process. I did that sort of over a few weeks, maybe a month or so, sort of just chipping away at it slowly.
Yeah, that was a mammoth report that you did there. Fantastic piece of work, I must say.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it took a while. It sort of started just as a sort of like little notes here and there. I was writing them down as they came to me, and then it was the compiling it all together that took the time, though. Sort of the formatting. That I'm sure you know yourself. Sort of that making it look a bit prettier is the difficult stuff. Actually, writing the content isn't too bad. It's just making it look presentable. Difficult.
Yeah, absolutely, and visualization actually plays a massive part now in data and stats in all sports, really. And there's not a day goes by that another data fiend is on Twitter with another style of presenting a style of play or a player's stats or whatever. But it's great. Just to give everybody a heads up what we're planning to do on this episode, then we're going to have a very brief chat to start with about, just probably identify a couple of interesting signings that there's been. I know Colin's been keeping a close eye on somebody quite local. We're then probably going to move on to something a little bit different for us, because we've all picked a team each from each of the EFL leagues. So one in the Championship, one in League One, one in League Two, just to have a quick look at their business over the summer and really the squad depth and signings and stuff like that. So there'll be some quite interesting debate, I'm sure, and discussion about that. And then, obviously, as Notts fans, it wouldn't be right if we didn't finish off by just having a quick look at Saturday's game at home to Maidenhead, the season opener. So maybe on the interesting signings bit, Colin, maybe you should just kick off with that. And because, like I say, you've been keeping tabs on somebody quite local. So.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, one of the fascinating things since starting this has been trying to identify players with potential, trying to identify players who you think you can sort of see their trajectory, seeing them moving on. And I think that's one of the secrets, isn't it, of the transfer market, of really trying to make sure that you find someone who's good at what they do. And it brings me back to what you were saying about the data and visualizations, think about those KPIs, but also thinking about where can they be improved, where can they develop. So one of the things that I wanted to do is not just rely on the data and the data analysis, which obviously we feel is incredibly important in enabling you to look at the wider market, but also doing a little bit of those eyes-on scouting as well. So one of the players that took my attention was Jezeren Achegbalum, and I'm really hoping that I'm doing that name justice, for Matlock Town, a player who I read a little bit about first. Interesting backstory, was at AC Milan as a very young child before coming over to the UK. Although I think, if I seem to remember rightly, that I think he started out in defence, but he's this sort of kind of all-action winger. When I saw him at Matlock a few times, came down to Basford, for example. So that was fortuitous, being able to kind of see him at close at hand. And he struck me as a really kind of adventurous, wide player, but also very comfortable as well as going inside. And I thought, thinking particularly about the most recent game that I saw him play, I find it very significant that Matlock were really struggling to get goals, and they moved him centrally, and that was the thing that really unlocked the game for them. I felt, and I mean this is absolutely no disrespect to Matlock Town at all, but I felt sometimes he was just on a different wavelength, so he was playing balls through that weren't really being read, or he was making runs that weren't necessarily always seen. And so I felt, again, that not only did he look like a really good player at that particular standard, but I thought, given a higher caliber of player around him, who's perhaps anticipating these moves slightly more and being able to kind of facilitate that kind of movement off the ball, I thought would have been a really exciting thing. And so I kind of threw his name around to the one or two people that I know within football, and they listened to that as well. And so I was really pleased and surprised to see that obviously Chesterfield had made a move for him. I thought it was particularly interesting because last season we know that, I don't know how much this was interest or whether this was kind of a deliberate move to unsettle a promotion rival with Notts. So obviously Chesterfield were interested in Cal Roberts, and I'm not going to put too much pressure on the lad to say that they're absolutely the same, but a wide player who can cut inside, do a lot of movement off the ball, very good on the ball as well. I'd say that Ochegbelem has a benefit of a little bit more pace as well, natural pace. So I find it interesting that they've gone into the market again for a player, and I'll be interested to see his progress and him stepping up into full-time football and being surrounded by some real talent, as we know that Chesterfield have got. So that's one transfer that's taken my interest particularly.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. And sorry, how old is he?
So I think he's 22. Yeah, so
22.
22. Yeah, so he's done a little bit of work in the lower leagues, which I think is not always a bad thing. Do you know what I mean? He really knows how to scrap and battle. You know, I've seen him play on some difficult surfaces. I've seen him come against some really kind of seasoned professionals and come out on top as well. So I think he's the right sort of age to make that kind of move forward. You know, with that kind of upward trajectory. Obviously, there's going to be a little bit of learning. I think at Matlock, he dipped off a little bit in the middle part of the season, had to really graft to get back into the side and did an awful lot. So I think he's going to find that transition difficult. But I'm excited to see what he does.
Yeah. No, that'll be interesting. And sorry, what was his name again?
Jezrin Ochegbelem, and I'm really hoping that's the last time I have to say that, because I'm really worried that I'm not doing that name any justice. So if I've got that wrong, I apologise.
I think you've done him plenty of justice, Colin. Don't worry, no problem at all. Anybody caught you all right, Tom?
Yeah, well, one player that the first thing that got me into doing sort of data analytics was a lot of people were doing the recruitment documents. A lot of people were doing them across the Twitter space, and I decided to have a go at one. If I did it again now, I'd probably be quite disappointed with what I produced. But at the time, it was quite a big step in for me. And one player I identified for not to look at. At the time, I thought he'd gone under the radar, but since I realised he probably hasn't. Is Jacob Mendy, left back, who signed for Wrexham. I think last night or the night before. When I was looking at his stats, he was up there in everything. He played over 4,000 minutes. He did sixth most minutes in the National League, which I thought was exceptional sort of fitness levels for a wing back for Boreham Wood, who's going up and down. He's play all those minutes. He's got to be exceptionally fit, and he's such good attacking stats, such good defending stats. So the fact he's got to move to Wrexham, it's not surprising in terms of his quality of player. It's just surprising that there wasn't much transfer noise around him, to be honest. Up until about a week ago, I think he refused to train at Boreham Wood. So I don't know if that says anything about maybe his character or whether he was just desperate for a move to Wrexham, where he's probably going to be looking at challenging for the title. But he's a player I think could definitely play in the EFL higher up. I think he's fantastic. He's he attack all out action wing back who can attack, defend, and exceptionally fit as well up and down the left side. So a brilliant player, someone that caught my eye when I was doing that document. Yeah,
without a doubt, and I think we can all say that he's not gone unnoticed when we've seen him play, certainly against Notts. He's always looked one of the better players on the pitch for Boreham Wood, and to have an attacking threat like that as well at Boreham Wood just doesn't compute, really, does it?
No, exactly. I think he did for Wellstones. I can't remember how many goals. I think it might have been 8 goals. That's off my head. I haven't got it written down.
Yeah.
But he got loads. He got quite a few goals at Wellstone from left back, and then done the same. I think he got 5 or 6 goals, 5 or 6 assists for Boreham Wood as well. So he's playing these sides that aren't particularly attacking. So for Wrexham, who are playing that wing back system under Parkinson as well, he's going to be a player that I'm fortunately going to be looking for watch for Wrexham, obviously rather than Notts. But I'm looking forward to seeing him play because he's a great player.
Excellent. Cool. From my point of view, I was really interested at the back end of last season with a young left wing back who was playing at Oxford City last season in National League South, a lad called George Harmon. So much so that I ended up doing a bit of a digital report, which is available on the website as well. So if you do go on to analystbar.com, there are digital reports and all sorts of things like that you can download and get access to. But again, he's 22, 23 years old, left wing back, very, very fast, great with the ball at his feet, finds himself in some very, very dangerous areas as well in the attacking third. Good assists. He's got a decent left foot on him as well. He's scored a few goals, but also with that bit of pace. He could do with bulking up a little bit, but with that bit of pace, his tracking back was always very good as well. But it was interesting to see actually that come the end of the season, he actually managed to get a move up to Ross County up in Scotland. So a good couple of levels probably above where he's used to be playing. So it's nice that between us we're looking and being able to identify, young players, young talent that we think could certainly, we can certainly watch their trajectory of their career paths and see them improve for sure. So one of the other things then, Colin, that we were just discussing earlier as well that we've mentioned is we've all had a look at a club in the EFL, predominantly around their summer transfer business and the structure and how it's gone about, just to try and spread our wings a little bit and hopefully entice a few more people to the pod site, to the pod as well. But I think, did you mention you were having a look at Cardiff City?
Yeah, for a number of reasons really. Some of them slightly selfish. So my dad's Welsh, grandmother's Welsh as well. So I've always had a bit of an interest in Welsh football particularly, and I feel right from the national team downwards there's a resurgence in terms of Welsh, in terms of the national football, in terms of also they've addressed an awful lot of the infrastructures around Welsh football as well. And so obviously Swansea and Cardiff being sort of two standout clubs with this. So I've always had a kind of an eye on their progress, but I think Cardiff particularly has taken my interest, and some of that has been because their transfer business quite recently seems to be a real handbrake turn from the Cardiff City of old. I think there are some well considered kind of traditional views of Cardiff City and the type of side that they are or they were. A very physical side. They tended to rely on those kind of players. Beyond probably the high points of their careers, players who have fallen from the Premier League, for example, really trying to get those last bits out. And one of the things that was quite interesting was I feel that Cardiff have made deliberate moves to kind of change away from that policy. And I think that started really with the appointment of Steve Morrison, who's the manager who interestingly came from the under-23s at Cardiff, and then was established as the first team manager. And I think that's always the first sign, I think, of someone really trying to change their ways. And I know that the Cardiff City management team were very impressed with what he was trying to do and the changes he was trying to make, which obviously resulted in him becoming the full-time manager. You only need to really sort of look at the transfers out, first of all, in terms of seeing that Cardiff are trying to move away from those kind of stereotypes of their previous kind of regime. So you look at players like James Collins, Aidan Flint, Will Vokes as well, players who sort of late 20s, 30s as well. Big earners, you'd imagine, really sort of high caliber, or certainly have had some real high points, and there's some substantial transfer fees that have gone into those players previously. They're on the way out. They've exited Cardiff, and what's happened is they've started to recruit players younger. I'm not saying particularly incredibly young. We're not talking sort of 18, 19, but certainly those sort of players in their early to mid 20s, looking for kind of solutions to kind of bring in a slightly more rejuvenated Cardiff City. And I have to say, this was reflected in a lot of the, we've talked about Tom's excellent work on the National League, work on the kind of predictions, and those sort of things. Every time I've heard a Championship version, Cardiff City have been very much kind of in the lower reaches. Quite a few people actually predicting relegation. And I'm not here to suggest that they're going to be dark horses for promotion or anything like that, but I really do think there's something quite interesting from a recruitment point of view is happening at Cardiff, headed up, like I say, by Steve Morrison, but also Tim Henderson as well, who I believe has been made the head of scouting. Someone who, going back to what brings us three together, the analytics stuff, he was a very early sort of celebrator of the analytics thing, as well as obviously doing the eyes on scouts and being a very experienced scout as well. So there seems to be a kind of drive in their recruitment policy and really trying to make sure that they start to change things around. And we saw it very early doors, so they took on Norwich City, who I must admit, and it killed my accumulator staying dead, but that's no surprise for anybody who's regularly watched this, that I'm not particularly the greatest batter in the world, or the most risky, to be honest. But Cardiff getting a result against Norwich City, that team that we all kind of expect to be there or thereabouts, and going back in, yo-yoing between the Championship and the Premier League. And, the feedback that I got really from it, and looking at kind of things like XG and stuff, I think Cardiff probably nicked the result, if I'm honest, but it must give them, you know, a lot of confidence going forward that they've made this quite aggressive rebrand of the side, really reduced the average age of the squad, really brought in some interesting recruitments. You know, there's a lad from Paderborn in Germany, for example, who I saw he got into the team of the week, so has hit the ground running from a debut point of view. And have taken on a side that was really expected to do well in Norwich City, and have surprised them really. So I'm going to be keeping my eye on them, particularly as the season goes on. Interested to see whether they're able to maintain this. You know, even if things are going, you know, a little bit less positively than they are now. You know, are they going to stick with this philosophy, or are they going to, let's say in January, revert back to the tried and tested sort of experience methods, as if people are predicting correctly that they're going to be in for a season of struggle?
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, definitely. So, just thinking about that, then, I mean, you've covered off quite a lot there on the Cardiff side of things. Do you honestly feel that with those changes, they are going to make quite a difference, and they will be challenging, or do you think it's probably a step too far at this moment in time?
I'd imagine it's probably a step too far, but I think this is the first step towards an exciting future, hopefully, for Cardiff. I mean, one of the things that we've talked in our WhatsApp group is the state of the transfer market in itself. You know, the Championship, there's not a lot of money being spent. There's an awful lot being received. There's a lot of selling going on, and particularly selling to the Premier League. But there's not a lot of money being spent. So I think it's a sensible move that Cardiff are making, that they're investing in players who hopefully they're going to be with them for a year, 2 years, 3 years, rather than, you know, betting it all on a big 1 year deal for a player who might have just fallen out of the Premier League, or maybe a top Championship player once upon a time. So I don't necessarily think that this is going to be the season for Cardiff City. But what I do think is this is the step in the right direction, and probably a step that the most of the Championship really needs to be thinking about, is what looks like the whole market in the Championship seems to be tightening their belts. Obviously, the test will come, let's say, in the January transfer window, if Cardiff are really up against it like people have predicted, whether they can be strong enough to kind of resist the temptation to go back to those kind of tried and tested methods, and if they can actually sort of stick to this philosophy and build on it going forward.
Okay, excellent. So we'll drop down a league, then League One, Tom, and your choice.
I went with Forest Green. Just quick to add to Colin's point there, just 100% agree about the state of the sort of the transfer market in general. I think a lot of teams, it's noticed a big shift where sides that are sort of looking at players that are on the way up, the upwards trajectory. In the past, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, you sort of sniff at teams bringing up players that are a few divisions below, but it seems to be more and more commonplace now, because players that are dropping down divisions, I think that it's becoming more apparent that people are, you know, these more experienced players, they drop down quite a few divisions, and they're not as hungry anymore. They're sort of there for one last sort of payday. And I don't want to tie everyone with the same brush, but I feel like that's something that a lot of teams are looking at now, and sort of ties into Forest Green. They've made 10 signings so far, and they're sort of a side that are quite well known for sort of their progressive philosophy, I suppose, and sort of forward-thinking philosophy on and off the pitch. Obviously, you know, I won't sort of get tied in too much sort of their owner's philosophy in terms of the vegetarian, veganism sort of angle. It's not something I get too caught up in. But in terms of their transfer recruitment, they've made 10 signings, and 8 of them are 26 or below. So you're looking at a lot of players that are sort of on the up in their career, and I think that is something that I think is more of a whole club philosophy rather than the manager, because the previous manager, Rob Edwards, he's gone to Watford now, who exciting young manager who's obviously gone to a side at the top of the Championship who are probably favourites or thereabouts for promotion, along with sort of Norwich and maybe Middlesbrough. I think the sort of the big 3 that are touted to go up the Championship. So he's gone, and obviously they've got Ian Birchlin, who we're all obviously very familiar with, former Notts manager, coach, I should say. And I think stylistically fits their system well, because they play wing backs, and that's what Birchall sort of implemented at Notts. And I think it's interesting moving even away from the transfers we're going into in just a second. They're looking for coaches throughout the pyramid. They're not just taking a tried and tested league. You know, they've obviously been promoted last season into League One, so I should have gone level with that. They've gone to League One. It's the first time they've been there. They've not gone for an experienced sort of League One manager. They've gone for Birchley, who's, you know, a division below, or two divisions, I suppose you could say, now below, and they've brought them up from the non-league. So I think it's interesting they're looking even there for their managerial appointments, not just on the pitch. But and I think it is important to point out that Forest Green did fade towards the end of last season. They won the title, but they were very fortunate that X didn't catch them. So I think they'll need to rectify that this season. But I think a lot of people have predicted them to struggle. But I think on their business, I think they're going to do really well. I mean, just look at some of the names they brought in. Harry Boyes came in from Sheffield United on loan. He left back last season in the National League, who was absolutely superb. He got into the team of the season, I think. And we spoke about Mendy earlier. I mean, he got in the team of the season ahead of someone like Mendy. You know, so he's a very good left back. Again, all action. So you know, I just got some of his stats written down. You know, he made 2.57 crosses per 90, and he won over 55% of his defensive duels. So he's a defender who's good at both ends of the pitch. And another player they brought in from the non-league was Armani Little from Torquay. Another player who's 25 years old, absolutely in prime of his career. I think it's important to bring in players like that. He's on a free transfer as well. And the way I look at him is a very similar profile to Ruben Rodriguez, who the quotes, statistical profile anyway, and the figures quoted for Rodriguez is sort of anywhere around 200, 300,000. So the fact they've managed to get a player like Little on a free transfer is obviously great business from them. And the biggest thing for Forest Green was they lost their right wing back, Kane Wilson, to the Championship. I think to Bristol, on a free. A right back, and they've replaced him with Corey O'Keefe from Rochdale. And I have a little comparison of the two, written it down, and I won't bore you with in-depth stats, but they're very similar, other than sort of the attacking side, where Wilson has almost double the offensive actions of O'Keefe, but I think that might be down to the side he plays in. The Forest Green are sort of at the top of the division, whereas Rochdale are not so an offensive side. So yeah, overall, Forest Green are a club that are doing things the right way, looking at it, well, right way in my opinion anyway. You know, obviously there's no one right way to do things, but they're looking at players from two divisions below. Obviously, I'm a big fan of the National League, big advocate for the talent that's in that division. And you know, not only have they got a manager in there, they've also got a couple of players. The one notable exception to that was Connor Wickham, who they signed, I think last night or the night before. Wickham he's 29. I can't believe he's only 29. I mean, he's been going for well, I think about a decade now. He's been scoring goals for a long time. But he's a player that I think is maybe they've identified him as a player who's sort of untapped potential. Maybe hasn't really scored a lot of goals for a long time now. He only managed 319 minutes last season in League One, which is is absolutely nothing. But he's a player that's sort of on the downward trajectory, I guess. So maybe they've identified him as a player they can reshape or remold. I don't know. And maybe Birchall's asked for a striker sort of in a Carl Wootton like sort of esque mould in terms of that he's a taller striker who can lead the line. So that's a surprising move in my opinion for Forest Green. But overall, their business has been, I think, brilliant so far. And I've got them tipped sort of for high and mid-table in League One. A lot of people think they're going to struggle, but I think they're going to do really well. And they won the first game late on, so I think they'll do well this season.
I was going to ask you about that because in my mind, I could see them mid to lower end of the table. I know that there'll be an attacking threat, and the stuff that you've mentioned then would definitely lead you down that path. But I think one of our Achilles' heels last season at Notts with Ian Birchall in charge was in some of those games that we really needed to turn up, we did seem to have that little bit of a soft underbelly, which we've all spoken about ad infinitum. Yeah. And I just wondered what your thoughts were about the back line there at Forest Green at the moment. Do you think that there's enough structure and strength and resilience there basically to help them to progress that a little bit further up the league than maybe people are expecting them to?
Well, that's the thing. It was a game I had an eye on because of Birchall that first game, and I think they went 1-0 up, and I thought when the opposition equalised, I thought, here we go again, sort of Birchall. It was always the case whenever you saw Notts go 1-0 up in a tight game, you'd always think need to score a second or third to kill it off, because the opposition going to get one late on. But it's actually Forest Green that got one late on. So I don't know if that's a opening day, sort of their first game, they were up for it, or whether it's a fixture of they've got a bit more mental strength going forwards. I mean, they have got Ben Stevenson. I know, I think Colin's a big fan of. They've got him sort of protecting that back line. So, you know, he might be a bit more solid than Notts. Notts never really had that midfielder who could sort of really offer good protection. But yeah, we know Birchall maybe isn't the most defensively sound manager. I genuinely think they will get a mid-table finish. But they'll do well to sort of solidify the season and push on. But I'm hoping for, you know, I like Birchall. I'm hoping for his sake they do, and they showed in their first game they have got a bit of character. But yeah, you very rightly pointed out we did have a soft underbelly, and it'll be interesting to see how that progresses throughout the season. If they can, you know, when the back's up against the wall late on, can they pull it out of the bag over and over again? So we'll see.
Definitely. And there's one other little link to Forest Green, I think, Colin, that we've not been mentioned yet, but a player that you brought to everybody's attention, blimey, when we first started doing this just over a year ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's weird, isn't it? You know, I know obviously Tom mentioned about Stevenson, and you know, it is a weird, almost ironic way that obviously I was suggesting him as a solution. We were talking about Michael Doyle, weren't we? We were talking about what happens when Michael Doyle leaves, and how do we replicate, you know, what he was able to provide even in the latter stages of his career. And Stevenson was one of those players that I thought could do a job. You know, I also thought that one of the things that I felt Notts needed to be better at was recruiting from the East Midlands. And Stevenson, I think, is a lad from Leicester. So I really like that idea as well. And like I say, it's fascinating to see these players progress, isn't it? And we talked about it right at the start. You know, it's really fulfilling to identify a player and think, you know what, you've got a chance. And even though it doesn't come to fruition in the way that all three of us would like, you know, the players that we mentioned in all signing for Notts would be a dream. But seeing them, you know, kick on and progress. I mean, Ben Fox, I think, deserves a mention as well. Someone who was a free agent when we were talking about, again, Michael Doyle leaving the midfield at Notts and how we could replicate that kind of tenacity. You know, he goes to Grimsby, was probably certainly the player of the playoffs and the playoff eliminators, but also gave it a decent second part of the season. And he's ended up at Northampton Town. So, yeah, like I say, the Stevenson deal is really good to see him moving up and moving into League One. I think he would have a really good season again.
Excellent. No, it's just nice to see again, like we said right at the beginning of the podcast, that, you know, we're able to watch this development pathway for these players as we're picking them up when they're sort of young rough diamonds and seeing how their careers progress. It's really interesting. So we'll drop down to League Two then. I couldn't help but obviously pick out Bradford City. A little bit of the Wrexhams about them this season, probably, but not with the spending, because obviously February this year, all of a sudden they've got Mark Hughes there, which there were, you know, a lot of raised eyebrows about that. And they obviously mean business this season. They're obviously, you know, desperate to get back up to League One at least. They're a big club for League Two. We talk about Notts being too big for the National League, you know, all the same could be said, you know, similar sort of club really, probably a bit bigger than Notts, Bradford City. And you do expect to see them a little higher in the pyramid. But Mark Hughes has had a very, very busy summer, but I think he's been really astute as well with what he's done. I've got a list here of 13 players that he's brought in. A couple of them were loaners last season as well, and they've been able to get them back in again or make them a permanent deal and what have you. But he's gone about it in a really clever way. So goalkeeper Richard O'Donnell, who was between the stakes, you know, recently for them, class goalkeeper, he's gone to Rochdale, 33 years old. You know, well, we know goalkeepers can go on for quite a while yet. But what Mark Hughes has done there is brought in a young lad from Southampton called Harry Lewis, apparently very highly rated goalkeeper. Most of his experience has been in the under-23s with Southampton, EPL2, but he did have a reasonable loan spell with Dundee United a few seasons ago as well. So he's had some experience of, first team football as well. And then if we go into the defence for them, and I'm doing it this way so that I can remember everybody and pick up everybody that is, because the movement that they've had in the transfer market has been quite unbelievable. So 5 players that have come in, and it's worth noting as well that there's only 3 out of these 13 players that I can't find anything about it being either a free or a fee paid transfer. Everybody else has been on the free, which is remarkable, really. But you've got Matty Platt, who's come from Barrow, Brad Halliday from Fleetwood. We'll all remember Timmy Odesina, who was at Hartlepool. I remember him when he was at Hartlepool the season that they got promoted. And they've been able to take on Romany Critchlow as well from Huddersfield Town on loan, 23-year-old at centre-back. But, they did need to bring those players in as well, because they'd lost Callum Cook to Hartlepool, for example. I mean, 44 games last season at centre-back for them in the league, 2 goals, 7 assists from centre-back, is a big hole to fill. And I think looking at the mix of those defenders, certainly the centre-backs there in Matty Platt and Timmy Odesina, there's some real quality there. And again, without paying fees for these players, really, really astute signings. And then you move into the midfield. I mean, they've lost Charlie Vernon to Lincoln City, who was a big player for them. Still only 25. I think 21 goals and 11 assists in 118 games for Bradford. So a huge miss for him. But one of the key signings here is Richie Smallwood, 31 years old, centre midfield, but we'll all know him playing much higher than that level, certainly with Hull City and what have you. And his contract had come to an end at Hull City, so they managed to get him in for nothing. Again, this is probably Mark Hughes with his connections, and that's the benefit of having a manager of his sort of calibre, I suppose, at that level, and how you can make that work for you. There's also Ryan East coming, central defensive midfielder from Swindon, again on a free. Another cracking signing. A bit of sad news. Another good signing from Walsall was Emmanuel Osadebe, right midfielder, 25 years old. Made his debut on Saturday, suffered a double fracture. So probably out for at least 6 months, which is an absolute killer. So I know that there's some talk now about Bradford looking again for that attacking wide midfielder to try and fill that void. And there's been a lot of talk. How much of it is true, I don't know, but it's been in a couple of the nationals and some of the online sites as well that that City are probably looking to sign or get Scott Banks from Crystal Palace on the books there. So he's an exciting young wide midfielder there, attacking midfielder. And then when you move on to the attack, Harry Chapman, right wing from Blackburn on a free. Jamie Walker, he was on loan from Hearts last season. It's a permanent deal. Jake Young was at Forest Green last season. I can't find out whether they paid a fee or not for him. But again, 21 years old, centre forward. Interesting move there. Cian Harrott on loan from Huddersfield, another young centre forward. And of course, somebody we'll all be familiar with at Notts is Vidane Oliver. So still only 30 years old. In my mind, I see him as about 35, 36. I don't know why. But yeah, I mean, last season, he played a fair few games for Gillingham in League One, 9 goals, 4 assists in the league. So, and he played on Saturday as well for them. I think he played the whole game. So I think they see him as a big part of their strike force as well this season. And just looking back at those, their arrivals and the departures, there's been a big turnover in the players. But it's interesting that the average age of the players brought in is about a year younger than the average age of the players that have gone out, around 23 to 24 years old, with the current squad now with an average age of about 26. So he's obviously working towards bringing that average age down a little bit as well. But also we talked about the money and how there's not big fees and this, that and the other going around now. And obviously using transfer market for estimated values on these players. I had a look at the players that have gone out and the players that have come in. And the estimated value of the arrivals was 2.14 million that he's had for free. And the estimated total value of departures was about 1.28 million. So there was no fees on any outgoing players either, I don't think. So it's been cost neutral, as we heard somebody once say a few years ago at Notts, but the actual value of those players in the squad as well has enhanced the squad in monetary terms, to the point that the estimated value of the full squad now is around the 3.2 million mark for a League Two side. That's quite some business, and they obviously mean business this season. I'm really excited to see how they do. I think it's going to be interesting for sure.
Yeah, I think what links the three clubs that we're talking about together is just about kind of smart recruitment, isn't it? You know, even though the recruitment approaches are different and they're operating in different markets, and you know the infrastructures within the clubs are different, I'm sure as well. You know, clubs are having to work a lot harder than, should we say, the scattergun approach to recruitment that we've seen. You know, we've seen to our cost at the club that all three of us support. But you know, this idea that clubs are starting to have to really make calculated decisions and making sure that they recruit the right solutions, not only to improve themselves on the pitch, but also with one eye on the finances as well, because obviously they're looking at, you know, blooding some of these players in the hope that maybe they'll step up and attract a fee in the future. So I think even though the three clubs we've mentioned are all very different and with very different objectives, I think that's the one thing that unites all three choices.
No, definitely. And I think that goes a bit further as well when you look at the backroom staff and some of the people that are now getting involved in the coaching side of the game, you know, and those clubs that are progressive, that are using the data, you know, they're making sure that, you know, they've got a head coach or a manager, they've got an assistant coach, they've got a goalkeeper coach, they've got a set piece coach, you know, it all comes together to make that club and that team as a whole hopefully more competitive in what is becoming an ever increasingly competitive game, both from the sport itself and financially to be involved in.
No, definitely. I think what you said about the average age was interesting. You know, and Mark Hughes is he's always been quite a progressive manager, and the fact he's took the step down to League Two level that he's identified. He's not sort of gone in there as a gone in there as a job for the boys, sort of bringing in old pros he's managed up the levels. He's not done that, but in 35, 36 years. Sometimes you see that at League Two level, you know, one of the managers, higher level manager drops down, and then he brings in 5 or 6 players that were good for him 5-6 years ago. You think, well, he's actually put in players that, you know, all the players you mentioned there have been good at the level or around the level. So on frees as well, he said brilliant. And I think what he said about all three clubs, you wouldn't look at any of the three clubs and look at those transfers and say that's bad business. You look at all three and think that, you know, the smart, shrewd moves, but all for different reasons, and that's what links all the clubs together, definitely. Yeah,
absolutely. If we move on from that little bit, there's another little thing I'd just like us to touch on briefly, and it's just another bit of fun that we're bringing into this for ourselves, really. But I'm sure some viewers will find it interesting as well. We made a little we had a little agreement, didn't we, between the three of us to all pick a team from overseas that we're going to follow and start to bring a bit of information to the pods and on the site and on the Twitter side of things as well. But I thought it'd be nice today if we had a look at those clubs that we've chosen, and maybe just between us have a little sort of chat about why we chose those clubs and what we're looking forward to seeing from them, you know, over the coming months. So, do you want to start, Colin?
Yeah, go on. Well, I'm like I say, I'm wearing the shirt. I've got the merchandise already. Yeah, so which actually is one of the ways how I became aware of this club. So holiday 2001 ended up being stranded in Thessalonica due to September the 11th and no planes flying and all that sort of stuff. So all my cases were locked up in the airport and I needed a change of clothes quite desperately. So I ended up finding a sports shop in Thessalonica and having the choice over some domestic shirts. And of course, the team that plays in black and white would have appealed to me, which was PAOK. And again, going back to my pronunciations, I'm really hoping that I'm doing that justice as well. And so I've always been kind of fascinated with them. And I'll be honest with you, my interest probably leveled off to things like Football Manager and managing them on Football Manager up to the point where our red neighbours across the Trent ended up being taken over by the owner of Olympiakos as well, Mr. Marinakis. So, and obviously they are sworn enemies. So it kind of built the narrative, I must admit, in terms of my interest. But going back to kind of recruitment narratives as well, one of the things that PAOK seem to be having to do is, like we talked about before, and like probably what we talked about with Cardiff particularly, is they're having to replace some really experienced pros, people who've played 150, 200 games for the club. They always seem to have been there or thereabouts, finishing second. They've had the odd title win. I think they won the cup as well last season. But they're having to really recruit aggressively in terms of replacing some of these older heads. And the guy who's doing it is a guy called Jose Boto, who was involved with Benfica, first of all, a fantastic organisation, in terms of youth development and identifying talent. Then he went to Shakhtar and again made millions and millions of pounds with Shakhtar in terms of recruitment from South America, particularly Brazilians. So he's weaving his magic again, and he's bringing the average age of the squad down, like we talked about with some of the teams that we talked about in the EFL. Really trying to make use of those connections in South America, in Portugal. And so I'm fascinated to see how well that goes. And again, hopefully given the time and the resources, it may be that they achieve their objective in winning the Greek Super League this season and having a good time of it, going forward. So I'm paying particular attention to them and hopefully seeing one or two of their players rise to prominence.
Yeah, well, we'll look forward to hearing more about PAOK then as the season progresses. What about yourself, Tom?
Well, I've sort of looked at a league as a whole. Looked at Hungary, again for selfish reasons. My girlfriend's family are from Hungary, so I looked at that league, and one player that caught my eye straight away was Adam Martin, or Martin Adam, because in Hungary you say the last name first.
Yeah.
And he scored 31 goals in 32 games last season, so obviously caught the eye straight away. Striking, prolific, absolutely prolific. And he actually played for Hungary against England in that. It was 5-0, wasn't it? When they annihilated us a few months ago. He got 2 assists in that game. He's a big centre forward. I think he's 6'2", 6'3", so he's a big fellow. He scores all types of goals. He's got a thunderous left foot on him. But he's actually got a move to South Korea, which I thought was a strange move. I think maybe money, without sound disrespectful to the South Korean, to the K League. I mean, money orientated move. He cost over $1 million, which is quite a lot for the Hungarian league, because they actually spent Hungarian league actually spent according to Transfermarkt, again these are their figures. They spent, the whole league as a whole spent 4.8 million euros, but brought in 2.6. So Adam Martin was about half of that income in. So there's not been many sales, but the big issue in Hungary is sort of the balance of power is very heavily tipped towards Ferencváros, who are the sort of the main team, because of the Champions League money that they get from being even in the early qualifying rounds. So they're able to spend money each year. So sort of recruiting that in that league is heavily skewed to them. So they've brought in a player called Traore from Sheriff, I think a Moldovan or Andorran side, I think. And I mean, he's played in the Champions League last year. He scored 2 goals. He got 1 against Inter Milan. So he's a player that's experienced in the Champions League. He's 27 as well. Malian winger, and he looks like a really good signing and a player I'll look to keep an eye on, because what's interesting is not many players from that league make moves into the bigger leagues, which I think is something that might start happening over the next few years. You've seen sides like Brighton have taken quite a few players from Poland and leagues like that. So it'd be interesting to see if any players can sort of make the step across to the bigger 5 leagues. So I would have liked to see Adam Martin maybe instead of moving to Asia, if he'd have got to move to sort of, I'm not suggesting he'd be top flight in England or something like that, but sort of a French league or somewhere where they need a big striker who can score goals. I mean, he's shown he can do it on an international level as well for Hungary in the Nations League. So, and the team he played for, last thing I said, the team he played for was they scored Paxi, P-A-K-S-I, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. They scored 75 goals in 33 games, which was 15 more than Ferencváros, who won the league, second most. So they scored way more goals. So they're the side that I'm going to be keeping an eye on. They started the league with a 2-0 win this past weekend. It's gone. So, that's
cool.
What sort of recap on Hungary.
Yeah, we'll be looking forward to hearing more about that as well then. From my point of view, I've pretty much put a pin in the donkey's ass and came up with the A-League in Australia. And then I thought, I'll have a look through the A-League in Australia, and Wellington Phoenix, who are in New Zealand, but obviously playing in the A-League, caught my eye for no other reason than I really enjoy a New Zealand comedy called Wellington Paranormal. So it's just about some policemen and women who investigate paranormal things, but it's a comedy in Wellington in New Zealand. But anyway, I took a deeper dive and actually found it to be really interesting. There are a couple of players in there that I think I've already posted some bits and bobs about on Twitter and what have you. And yeah, I've not got many stats with me at the moment, but they seem to be a sort of mid-table team. It'll be interesting to see how some of these lads progress moving forwards. I know, talking to a couple of people on Twitter, certainly from over in Australia and New Zealand as well, that have suggested that the players that I've pointed out have got really good careers ahead of them and should be playing in Europe at some time soon as well. So that's going to be my interest moving forward. I think we're probably heading towards the end a little bit now. I think we were going to probably have a little chat about Notts and Maidenhead, but I know you've done some work on that yourself anyway, Tom, that's going out on Twitter. And obviously the Notts Stats preview will be out on Friday as well. Tom's made a contribution to that as well. So I think rather than doubling up on stuff that we're doing, we'll leave that for there. I think there's just one more other thing before we go that I think we'd just like to mention, and that's with yourself, Colin, and the walk that you're doing to the ground on Saturday.
Yeah, so it's the 1 year anniversary of unfortunately losing Notts fan and friend to everyone, really, Kurt Ward, someone who really needed an opportunity or an excuse to get to a game. And so, unfortunately with the untimely passing, everyone who knew him, played football with him, thought that they wanted the best way to commemorate that is to walk to the game. So we did that last season. And a few of the players from the Sunday League gave those who can. I have to say there's a fair few stiff joints and stuff going around, a few previous injuries that slowed the pace a little bit. But yeah, it's a great opportunity just to kind of remember what football's all about, really, and that kind of camaraderie and that kind of community aspect, and just to remember him, really. And we're just hopeful that the occasion's going to match it on the pitch, because I know for a fact that he'd be down there and he'd be screaming and shouting with the rest of us. So thank you for that. And like I say, I'm sure it'll be a good occasion, and hopefully the performance on the pitch matches it. Yeah,
definitely. And are you doing any collecting at all? Or?
No, so we did that last time, obviously, because supporting the family and stuff. This is really just about kind of just a memorial, really, and getting everybody together. There are a few ideas in the pipeline of hopefully getting lads together and just having a bit of a kick around, really, and organising it for charity. But that'll probably be towards the tail end of this current season, because quite a few of us need a lot of time to get match fit for a start. So yes, that's one of the plans that we've got in the near future. But yeah, it's just an opportunity to meet up. I think we're meeting at Phoenix Park at 12 taking a steady sort of walk. There'll be people joining and leaving, going a little bit further and then nipping on a tram or whatever. So yeah, so it's just a great opportunity to remember a great guy, really.
Excellent, absolutely. And I was lucky enough to get to know Wardy a little bit myself as well. And you're right, he had the ability to light up a room for sure, or certainly make a nuisance of himself on a five-a-side pitch. So good luck with that, and it's really good that that's happening. Okay, well, I think that kind of brings us to an end, guys. Tom, thank you very much. Your first inaugural Analyst Bar podcast. Some really interesting stuff that you brought in for us then. So thanks a lot for that. And like I say, Tom will be heavily involved in some of the not stats stuff as well moving forward. So keep an eye out for that. Colin, insightful as ever. The yin to my yang. Or whatever we want to say. So just really great to have us all back on again and providing some content. So let's all hope for the right results for everybody on the weekend, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Yeah.
Cheers.